I call Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I rise to take a short call on the committee stages for Taxation, Kiwisaver, Homestart and Remedial Matters Bill. And I also want to put a few questions to the Minister and the Chair, specifically in relation to clauses 8 to 11 in relation to the changes for veterans. And I did say in the first reading of this bill that I was slightly bewildered to have this legislation in front of the House after just last year. The House spent such a long time considering the Veterans Affairs Act, which was in turn the result of a very extended and about this large, I think, Law Commission report on the need to modernise our veteran support system. And Parliament spent many, many hours on that legislation. I have to say, at the very least, I'm bewildered to be here less than a year later, I think, with a bill talking about remedial matters that, in fact, is proposing, from what I can read in the bill, quite significant changes to what has been described as mistakes in that piece of work. And it is, again, I say, a disturbing trend that seems to be happening in this House, where we are fixing up mistakes in legislation of this government. And I would like to hear clarification about exactly what the in-the-hand impact will be for veterans of this change in legislation. I didn't sit through in the Select Committee, and I am concerned, after all the care that we spent on that committee listening to veterans about the hardship they're experiencing, and particularly as we are, and I'm not one to celebrate war, but as we are coming up to the 100th anniversary of Gallipoli, and there's been so much attention around remembering the lessons of that war and giving honour to the tragic loss and harm that was done to people sent into those conflict zones by this House, that we could potentially be passing legislation that would reduce their incomes and reduce the support available to them under the title of remedial matters is deeply disturbing to me, and I really do hope to have that positively clarified to us in the House tonight. And I would also like just to speak to what is the from the government's perspective, and on the election platform, what they cited as one of their key election responses to the housing crisis, which nobody on that side of the House seems to acknowledge as a crisis, was this bill, which in clause 6, it enables people to access their tax credits in their own Kiwisaver account when if they're eligible for a Homestart ability to access their Kiwisaver savings. So, which, as has already been mentioned, I think it amounts to about $521 a year, which, you know, at the very, very best case scenario is around $5,000 if they're old enough and enrolled in the scheme when it's at first inception in 2007. So we're not talking about very much money. We're not talking about any money new money at all, because it was money government had already contributed and put into people's Kiwisaver scheme. So it's just enabling people to access a little bit more, which also means they'll have less in the hand in retirement. And it is critical when we're discussing this and size of the problem to recognise how big the housing crisis is in this country. I think the average house of first home purchase in the 1970s was 25, from the best evidence I can get from the library. The most up-to-date information we've got looks at the age either being 34 or 36 now. And I would suspect it's quite a bit higher in Auckland, because that is a national figure. And I know I'm very lucky living in the wonderful Porirua East. Mr. Chair.
I call Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To be able to have bought a very cheap house. But I know that is not the reality in most of New Zealand. And in fact, the average house price in Auckland now is over $650,000. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's more than three times the price of my house price. But it requires a significant deposit. If you need 20% to have a deposit on that average, it's over $120,000. And then you think about how expensive rents are in Auckland and in many other places in the country, and what people have got left over and their ability to save for a deposit. It becomes clear it's impossible. And I was speaking with some caregivers up in Auckland on Monday night, and they were talking about how, they're working full-time, caring for their kids, living in Auckland, found a place close to their work, but they have well less than $200 a week left after they've paid their rent to cover all of the rest of their costs and care for their children. You're not going to be able to save for a deposit. You're going to struggle to feed your kids when that's the reality. So $520 of money that you already have from the government that isn't going to enable you to get anywhere near reaching that $120,000. I just don't think this Clause 6 lives up to the government's election promise. To consider this an answer to home affordability and people's access to buy their first home, it's a bit of a joke. But we're supporting it because it's, and it feels weird saying that even, but because, we know that for some people somewhere in the country, that little bit of money might be just enough to put them over the edge into being able to buy their first house, and it would feel curmudgeonly not to support that. But in terms of integrity, of this being a response to home affordability, to this being a response to the housing crisis, then the answer is no, it's not. And I can't imagine anyone in this country would be listening to any of this debate and have a sense of gratitude to the government, or even a sense of confidence in the government's ability to respond to the real issues facing this country at this time. So we offer our very provisional support and look forward to hearing the Minister answering the questions around the veterans' support, because that in fact may change our position on this bill. Kia ora.
I call Dave.